Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and this video is a starter guide for the weapons in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. I recently put out another video covering other aspects of the game for beginners, which you can find a link to in the description. Now, as a quick disclaimer, I am not a master of every weapon in Monster Hunter, and this video is not going to be an in-depth guide for every weapon, but more to give you a quick overview of each, their pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses, and perhaps some personal tips to help you choose which you might enjoy if you are just starting the game out. Every weapon in Monster Hunter has a lot of depth to it. It can take dozens of hours until you really get a single weapon after all. Becoming a master of all would take hundreds, if not thousands of hours. There are plenty of great resources however, such as Zen's fantastic guide for Sword and Shield, which you can look up if you're interested. Likewise, if you have any tips for specific weapons, feel free to leave them down below in the comments. Timecodes are on screen and in the description if you want to skip to a certain weapon. That out of the way, let's get started. At first glance, the Greatsword is one of the least complex weapons in Monster Hunter. You simply need to smack the monster for huge amounts of damage. But don't be fooled, a lot of the skill in wielding a greatsword well comes down to knowing when to attack, when you have time to get your largest hits off, as well as positioning yourself well. The greatsword is perhaps the slowest weapon, but also the single most powerful in terms of single hit numbers. The most basic combo for the greatsword is the true charge combo, 3 successive hits, the last of which does astronomical damage. You could say this is your bread and butter combo, but it is also your meat and potatoes. The greatsword's charge functionality is rather simple to explain, but a little harder to master. Simply put, holding down the button will charge up your sword, and you just need to release it at the right time to ensure maximum damage. The greatsword has a few utility moves as well, such as a launcher that can send other hunters flying, useful if they're sleeping for example, and an extremely useful shoulder tackle attack that can be used to hyper armor through almost any attack in the game whilst maintaining your current charge level. Hyper armor generally meaning that you will still take damage, but you won't flinch. You won't be staggered. The greatsword also has a very powerful jumping attack which can be used to quickly mount monsters. Even though it was nerfed a little with Iceborne, it's still very powerful. The best elements for a greatsword are, in my opinion, blast and sleep. But anything that keeps the monster still is your best friend, so utilising traps, knockdowns, paralysing and the like will help a lot. Whilst this is true for every weapon, it is especially the case for the greatsword, wherein you'll be doing a lot of sheathing and unsheathing, as with your weapon drawn you will move very slowly, so you need to be in the habit of putting your weapon away when you're not using it. And it is worth pointing out that the greatsword is able to block and guard attacks as well. Although the guard isn't as good as, say, the lance, it's still very useful in some instances. The sword and shield is one of my favourite weapons in Monster Hunter, as it is extremely versatile. The sword itself deals slashing or cutting damage, useful for severing, whereas the shield deals blunt damage, allowing you to knock out a monster by clobbering them in the head. It has an on-demand jumping attack if you fancy going for mounts. The sword and shield also has the unique feature of being able to use the slinger and various other items without needing to sheath, and even when your weapon is drawn you can still move moderately fast. It is this feature which means a lot of people will heavily promote a support or healer build using the sword and shield, utilising skills such as wide range and speed eating so that you can rapidly consume potions to heal yourself and your friends. However, the sword and shield is more than capable of putting out some crazy damage too. The most powerful combo would be the perfect rush. This will be your attack of opportunity, so to speak. Whenever you get a chance, such as the monster being knocked down, stunned or in a trap, you'll want to pull this off. In most other situations you'll want to infinite loop your lateral slash, return slash, spiral slash combo, as seen here. These have high motion values and are also fast and mobile, so you won't need to commit to the attack as you will with the perfect rush. MVs are, as covered in the other video, the power of percentage of your attack rating each attack does. For example, if lateral slash has an MV of 22, it means it will do 22% of your attack rating in damage, before we get to defense formulas and all that, compared to side slash's MV of 13, which would be 13%. So you could just think of it as the higher the MV, the better. And this applies for all weapons. You might want to look up a list of MVs and then try and find the highest one and work that attack into your rotation as much as you can, where possible. Alternatively, just test it yourself in the training area by seeing how much damage each attack does. Whilst most of the shield attacks with the sword and shield are generally underwhelming, they can be used for knockouts. Additionally, the sword and shield has a unique mounting attack. If you time the inputs, you can continue to strike the monster repeatedly. This is especially useful during multiplayer hunts, as you'll not only be doing damage, but keeping the monster defenseless and motionless, allowing your team time to attack or prepare before the monster is knocked down, for even more attacks. One unique thing about the SNS is that despite being a light weapon, which typically need 2 grapple attacks to weaken or soften an area, the SNS is able to weaken with 1 grapple attack if you perform the grapple out of a roll. Essentially, when your weapon is drawn, roll, and then press left trigger or L2, and you will jump and do an uppercut. If this connects with the monster, you can grapple onto them and do your grapple attack. As with most weapons, Poison and Blast are currently the best for SNS, but you can get away with just about any element or status. Personally, I really enjoy Volcano Divinity for the special draw attacks, which works really well with Perfect Rush. One of the flashiest and coolest weapons in Monster Hunter, the Dual Blades are weapon of choice for your Attack on Titan cosplayer, featuring attacks that feel very inspired by that series, such as the spinning blade dance. The Dual Blades give you the Demon meter. Pressing right trigger or R2 will activate Demon mode, which effectively powers up your attacks at the cost of a constant stamina drain. The Dual Blades are mobile weapons, as you can move quickly even with them drawn, allowing you to reposition effortlessly whilst fighting, even whilst attacking, enabling you to be hyper-aggressive in almost all instances. They also have a great infinite combo using the Fade Slash that should be your main damage dealing combo when you don't have a chance to get your Demon Flurry Rush out. A lot of Dual Blade attacks have built-in Mind's Eye or Sharpness Reduction feature. Mind's Eye effectively means the attack will not bounce from the enemy, so having these built in is very useful, especially for certain monsters, and considering the sharpness can really whittle down fast on the Dual Blades. Protective Polish is quite a useful skill for them in my opinion. They are a relatively simple weapon, as they are fast, low MV attacks. They're some of the better options for elemental weapons too, taking that into account. Especially paired with things like the Silver Rathalos armor, critical element and all that. I must admit, I mostly enjoy them for the Attack on Titan spin attacks, however they are a great beginner weapon in my opinion, as they'll help you learn about positioning, stamina usage, without being too punishing. If you whiff a few attacks, it's not going to really matter. At time of writing, the Longsword is the most popular weapon in Monster Hunter, which might be down to the fact that it is a giant katana. The basic loop of the Longsword involves building a meter with your normal attacks and then spending it on your spirit combo, landing the final hit of which will power up your sword. This can be done several times until your weapon has reached its maximum power. In addition, you can spend these upgrades, which will likewise deplete over time, on powerful attacks such as the Helm Splitter. The Longsword also features some powerful counterattacks and the ability to effectively infinite loop some of your combos. Although with the need to maintain your meter, most of your efforts will be spent on building it so that you can then spend it on a Helm Splitter. Effectively, you want to reach your red meter so you can Helm Splitter, as that is more or less your strongest attack. The Longsword is very long, which makes it a great choice for cutting tails and likewise tripping your teammates. You must beware of the Curse of the Longsword, however, missing the final hit of your spirit combo as the monster decides to float away at the last moment. The Longsword is one of those weapons where, played badly, it is effectively useless and won't contribute much, if anything, to a fight. But when in the hands of a master, it is an absolute sight to behold. Like the Dual Blade, many of its attacks have built-in Mind's Eye, and it's a very cool and stylish weapon. If you're a fan of Devil May Cry and playing for cool points, Longsword might just be the weapon of choice for you. Covering the hammer after the longsword is fitting, as the two weapons are quite opposite ends of the spectrum. Whilst the longsword is flashy, flamboyant, and stylish, the hammer is utilitarian. Whilst the 38-foot longsword is like to trip other hunters, the hammer is going to be the one exasperated at other hunters, flinching them as they try to obliterate the monster's cranium. The hammer is all about blunt damage, knocking out monsters left, right, and centre by bonking them on the head over and over. Whilst of course there is more to it than that, you could liken the hammer to the greatsword in that way. You want to get the monster into a situation where you can bop it on the head with your big bang attack to pummel it senseless. That said, the hammer isn't entirely without style. The spinning hammer attacks are some of the most fun in the game, in my opinion, to pull off. Having a monster on a slope means you can become Sonic the Hedgehog, if he wielded a supreme mallet. Whilst the greatsword deals a little more damage, the hammer has a little more mobility. It goes without saying, you will almost exclusively want to be attacking the head with your giant club. The hunting horn is the first unique weapon we'll be talking about. One of the more out there weapon types, and also one I have very little experience with. Superficially, you can compare hunting horn with hammer, but there's a lot more to it than that. You could think of it as a support weapon in some ways. The horn is able to play various melodies that will bolster you and your team's efforts with various buffs, such as more stamina, resistances, and whatnot. This can, in my opinion, enable some rather passive play with people who will just stand there in a corner and toot away. Whilst you can do whatever you want, I wouldn't suggest this playstyle, as you won't be contributing as much as if you were also striking the monsters, you know? Sure, the hunting horn probably isn't going to be the highest damage dealing weapon, but that isn't to say it can't do damage. It can put out very respectable damage numbers. So don't be afraid to get in there and batter things with your bagpipes. That more or less sums up the lance, so let's move on. No, the weapon I've used the most. The lance has the strongest guard and the best counters in Monster Hunter. Unfortunately, the price you pay for all your mobility and ability to keep on attacking is some of the lowest damage and lack of offensive options, relatively speaking. The main strength of the lance is, as mentioned, your ability to keep on attacking in almost any situation. Your basic 1-2-3 poke combo can be done either straight on or angled upwards, which is useful in many circumstances. I believe the high angle thrust has marginally higher MVs. Your strongest combo would be poke, immediate dash attack. This is what you'll want to do when you have the chance. If you're in the middle of a combo and a monster decides to attack you, well then you can counter thrust and keep on attacking. Several lance attacks feature guard point, which means you will attack and block at the same time, making them very safe options. If you're looking at the lance's wake up a sleeping monster attack, the easiest one would be your charged super guard thrust. You have the ability to bash with your shield, although it's only really useful if you think a monster is very close to a knockout. However, the leaping thrust multi-hit attack is a great way to close a short distance or to reposition yourself. The lance is frankly one of the more mobile weapons. You might think, why, look how slow you walk around with that out, but that's because you can charge, you can hop, you have a lot of options. You also have a great on-demand jump attack that you can use from any charge. This same charge also gives you flinch free against other players, meaning if you have downed a small monster in multiplayer, you might just want to charge into the monster to avoid being flinched by other players. It won't be optimal DPS compared to, the poke, charge poke, but it's easier and safer in the sense that if you're playing with people who like to slap you, the slapping's not going to bother you. I think the lance is a good beginner option as it's a very safe weapon, it will teach you about counters, and it's also extremely cool. It has such a good defense, it has on-demand mounts whenever you want them pretty much. It's one of my favourite weapons. I just wish it had a good attack of opportunity, such as a single, really big hit, or just something to do when I have the monster down and defenseless, where I can really put out some real damage. As without that, it just feels a bit lacking to me. Despite the names sounding nearly identical, the Gunlance and Lance are very different weapons. In effect though, the Gunlance has a strong shield and a lance that's able to poke. Where it lacks all the mobility and defensive counter options of the lance, it instead gains very powerful attacks such as the unique shelling. These attacks do flat damage and cannot bounce, making them very useful in certain instances. Gun lances come in 3 flavours: long, wide, and normal. Effectively, with a normal gun lance, you'll want a full burst, which enables you to dump your entire clip in a single attack. Obviously, the more shells in your clip, the more damage, and normal has the highest clip size. So with normal, you'll be spamming full burst combo, whereas a long gun lance is more about charging your shells and firing them off individually, and with wide, you'll be doing a thrust, shoot combo. The gun lance is the Michael Bay of weapons. Using the new worm stake, you can push out excessive amounts of damage in a very fun and satisfying playstyle that allows you to systematically destroy monsters with relative ease. It is worth pointing out that if you are focusing on shelling, you'll want some different skills compared to other weapons. For starters, shelling will chew through your sharpness like nothing else, and the gun lance rather uniquely makes use of skills such as artillery and capacity boost. Likewise, the shelling attacks do not apply elements or statuses, and as mentioned, they are flat damage, so you'll want to play with that in mind when you're attacking certain areas. For the most part though, the gun lance is relatively simple, and I think it makes a good beginner weapon. In fact, it was the weapon I used when I first got into Monster Hunter World back in the PlayStation 4 days. And it served me well throughout the base game, and even now it's an extremely powerful one. I'm honestly surprised more people don't use it. Now, I don't want to trivialise the switch axe, but it is one of those weapons I use specifically for one very cool attack. Fortunately, you can build around that attack in some instances, namely the zero-sum discharge. Indeed, there are 2 main playstyles for the switch axe that I see. Much like how the gun lance is split between normal, wide, and long shelling, the switch axe can be played built more around the zero-sum discharge. Alternatively, you can play in the more, well, standard way. In essence, the switch axe has 2 forms: axe form and sword form. Axe form allows you to move around faster, and whilst in axe form, your sword form meter will charge up by itself, whereas in sword form, which let's call Greatsword form, you move slower, but you have access to devastating combos. Unlike the Greatsword's methodical overhead slams, the switch axe's giant sword has sweeping, flowing combos that are very fancy and anime to behold. Attacking in sword form will build your elemental meter. When full, you'll deal additional damage on each strike. This is how zero-sum discharge works. To recap, when you are in axe mode, your sword mode will recharge by itself. When you attack in sword mode, it will deplete your sword mode meter but build your discharge meter. When you have attacked enough times with sword to fill the meter, you can then latch onto the enemy and explode them several times. It is possible to build around this using skills that will make the meter last longer, for example, and using abilities that will prevent you from being knocked off the monster whilst you're latched on and exploding them. Keep in mind, at higher levels of play against, say, tempered monsters, arch-tempered monsters, even if you're wearing the rock-steady mantle that grants you infinite hyper armor, it's very possible you might get killed whilst discharging. So it's not the best plan in the world, it's a gimmick, but it's a very fun gimmick that can dish out comical levels of damage too. Indeed, the switch axe, outside of spamming zero sum, offers a very versatile playstyle. Axe mode is really strong, sword mode really strong, lots of tools for many different encounters. You'll have a lot to learn and master, if you aren't being a one-trick pony like me and spamming zero sum discharge. One of the best attacks in axe mode is the overhead slam. Another weapon I've actually not put much time into as I don't enjoy the aesthetics or the style. The charge blade has 2 forms, much like the switch axe in fact. You have sword mode and axe mode, only this time it's sword and shield mode, and that's what you start in, your default mode shall we say. Effectively, you will use the sword and shield to build up a meter that you can then charge into your weapon, transform it into an axe, allowing you to deal devastating, super amped element discharge attacks, or SAEDs for short. To me, too much of the weapons seem to revolve around that very specific and linear function of building up for SAED and then unleashing it. And you might be thinking, how is that any different to zero-sum discharge? And honestly, I couldn't tell you. But with zero-sum discharge, I like it. With SAEDs, I don't like it. Still, it is a very effective weapon, and SAEDs are insanely powerful. The addition of Power Axe and the other new things make it less routine than it may have been before. The Charge Blade is a little complex for new players, but maybe that's for the best. You might want to dive into the deep end, so to speak, so that you can start with a more complex weapon so that you're used to handling various things at once. The Insect Glaive is the nearest thing we currently have to being able to play a Final Fantasy Dragoon in an action game, so it gets points for that. Combining the Insect and the Glaive, you'll be able to unleash an aerial playstyle that is unique and fun. Effectively, you will shoot your Insect at the monster. If you shoot it at the monster's head, it will gather red essence. Gathering red, white, and orange will then fully power up your Glaive, enabling it to do more attacks with higher damage. Unfortunately, the Insect Glaive's most unique aspect, the aerial attacks that are very fun to play with, are just not very good. Even if you fully build around them, and believe me I do, they are underwhelming compared to the standard ground attacks, which just don't interest me at all. Let's put it this way, let's say you're using a sniper rifle in an FPS, where the actual long-range projectiles, the bullets, aren't nearly as effective as just running up and hitting people with the butt or stock in melee range. Why would you bother having a long-range weapon? That is how the Glaive feels to me personally. My only interest is the unique aerial attacks, as the ground-based combos, whilst effective, they can be looped infinitely, they're plenty strong, they're just not interesting to me. The Glaive is, however, the king of mounting with the most on-demand aerial attacks and the unique ability to attack whilst repositioning during a mount. All of the Glaive's aerial attacks have pitifully low motion values, and I can only hope that changes one day in the future. That said, if you don't mind about the lower damage, Aerial Glaive is extremely fun in my opinion. It offers a exciting and unique playstyle. There are certain monsters, such as Xeno'jiiva and Lunastra, where it was extremely powerful, especially before Iceborne. And if you like the look of the ground combos, then by all means go for it. Personally, I'm holding out for them to fully embrace the Dragoon playstyle and make it an aerial force to be reckoned with. Just swap the MVs of the ground and aerial attacks and you're golden. Much like the Longsword, the bow is very popular and extremely easy to be, well, frankly useless with. If there is one weapon used by people who join a hunt and deal less than 10% team damage more than any other, it is the bow. It is just one of those weapons where the person using it will either be useless or a god. So if you like the look of the bow, make sure you become one of those bow gods. It has different playstyles, but the one you should certainly avoid is the spam circle, spam B attack to make it rain balls from the sky. This is overused by so many bow users, and there's a number of reasons you shouldn't use it. First up, it does no damage. Second of all, there are better ways to break parts. Third of all, the knockout damage isn't as much as you think it is. Finally, it's going to make your teammates want to kick you in the nose if you are flinching them with it. If you want to knock out a monster, use the hammer. The bow's strengths are not in knockouts. As the first range weapon we're covering, it is important to note that the bow isn't a long-range weapon in that sense. It has an effective range wherein you must stand to deal optimal damage. That effective range is actually quite close to the monster. Indeed, I would say the best way to think of it is to imagine the bow is actually more of a shotgun. You want to be several feet away from the monster's face using your shot combos, hopping from side to side so you can keep it going. Now of course that is just one playstyle, but I would argue it's generally the most effective with bows. It's all in how you approach the weapon. The bow can do insane levels of damage when played right, whilst also being very fast, very fluid, with some very cool attacks to boot. Along with bowguns, it sits right at the top of the potential DPS. The light bowgun is, as its name implies, a little smaller than the heavy bowgun. It enables you to dodge and move around more, while still having some big damage. The main difference between the bowguns would be that mobility factor, and also their special attacks differ. The light bowgun is able to place little mines around the monster which can then be detonated with further attacks, a little like the Gunlance's worm stake, I suppose. Whereas the heavy bowgun has either Wyvern Heart or Wyvern Snipe. The latter will enable you to pull off a long-range strike that hits multiple times, penetrating the monster. Whereas the former, Wyvern Heart, effectively turns your bowgun into a light machine gun to mow down the monster with ramping damage, and let's face it, it's what all the cool kids use. Each bowgun has its own different ammo types it can use. For example, one bowgun might be able to use Pierce 2 and Pierce 3 sleep ammo, whereas another bowgun will have Pierce 1 but not Pierce 3, and it might have spread ammo but not sleep ammo. You get the idea. You can also equip attachments to them, like you might want to equip some shields onto your heavy bowgun to make it able to guard enemy attacks when you're facing them and not attacking. Naturally, this means bowguns have a lot of different playstyles. Sticky ammo, which favours knocking out the monster by blowing up its face over and over. Or maybe you want spread ammo to play like a close range shotgun. Or pierce ammo that allows you to tear through enemies from a little further away. Bowguns are unique in this. Which weapon you use almost entirely determines your playstyle. Bowguns are also a little bit overpowered if you ask me, in that you can do potentially more DPS than every other weapon in the game, whilst also being very safe and having a lot of options open to you with status effects. We are past the times of mass cluster bomb spamming behemoth, but now we're in the age of rapid fire sticky ammo or spread ammo obliterating monsters, and well, it's a good time to be using bowguns. I might think it's overpowered, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. If you want to be overpowered in a video game, there's nothing wrong with that in my opinion. One downside to bowguns would be that to be at your most effective, you'll be, generally speaking, needing to bring ammo crafting shortcuts with you so that you can restock without heading to camp. Finally, whilst I'm not in the habit of keeping track, I believe most world records in Monster Hunter speedruns are held either by the bow or bowgun. I only bring that up because I know some people will base their weapon choice on what is the strongest or most meta weapon, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to be as optimal and as powerful as you can be, contributing huge damage to your team whilst having the option to bring along status effects, that's good for you, you know? At the end of the day, you just have to use what makes you happy. If it's using the weapon or if it's being powerful, that's going to depend entirely on you. And that about covers it. As mentioned, I am not a master of every weapon in Monster Hunter, nor indeed any of them really. I'm pretty good with the lance and the sword and shield, I'd like to think. I might be master rank, but I'm no master. But hopefully this provided you with a good overview of each weapon, and had one or two jump out at you as appealing. Now you can go and look up an actual master, an expert, and learn all the ins and outs. Likewise, in regards to speedruns, those can be a very good resource when you are looking to learn more about your weapon in terms of tips and tricks. Keep in mind they aren't the be-all and end-all. Of course, defeating a monster optimally in as short amount of time as possible is a great thing, but keep in mind a lot of these speedrunners, they're never going to get hit because they've practiced so much they can fight a monster with one hit point and win. If you're just starting out, you're probably not going to be at that level of skill. So don't feel the need to copy their builds exactly if you are looking at speedrunners. There's nothing wrong with building some defense into your kit. After all, it is better to beat a monster in 15 minutes than not at all because you died because you kept getting hit. But hey, until next time though, thank you so much for watching, and take care.